Good morning and welcome to the Virtual Licensing Committee of Allerdale Borough Council. My name is Lee and I'm the Democratic Services Officer, and for the purpose of this meeting, I'm also the host. I'll be assisting the committee with the use of technology to manage the process of the meeting. I will not have any control over the meeting, and the meeting will not begin until instructed by the chair. This meeting is currently being live streamed on YouTube and a recording will be made available afterwards. Everyone has indicated they're attending has now joined, so what we'll do is some introductions, starting with the members. Councillor Bainbridge.
Good morning, Councillor Mary Bainbridge.
Councillor Daniels.
Good morning, Councillor Daniels.
Councillor Gaston.
Good morning, Councillor Peter Gaston.
Councillor Granger.
Good morning, Councillor Malcolm Granger.
Councillor Horsley.
Good morning, Councillor Horsley.
Councillor Kendall. Councillor Kendall has just joined the meeting. He is here. Councillor Lynch.
Good morning, Councillor Elaine Lynch.
Councillor Mumby. Councillor Mumby's here. You may be on mute, Councillor Mumby.
Good morning, Councillor Mumby.
Councillor Smith.
Good morning, Councillor Smith.
Councillor Tyson.
Morning, Councillor Alan Tyson.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Good morning, Councillor Will Wilkinson.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the officers. Jill Morgan.
Good morning, Jill Morgan, Lakeland Licensing Manager.
Gillian Collinson.
Gillian Collinson, Senior Licensing and Compliance Officer.
Thanks everyone for your introductions. I'll now hand you over to the chair to start the meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We shall start the meeting. We have in front of us details, papers, etc., etc. And we'll start it with the agenda. And Lee, if you will operate the show of hands for me, will you please, if anybody wants to ask a question?
Yes, Chair, we just need to start at item 1.
Yeah, okay. Item 1, it is pages 3 to 14, is to sign as the correct record the minutes of the following meetings. Licensing Committee held on the 20th November. We'll take them together. Licensing Committee held on the 20th November. Licensing Regulatory Panels held on the 24th of February and on the 26th of June. Are we agreed?
Agreed. I'll move the minutes.
Move the minutes. Thank you. Any apologies for absence?
Sorry, Councillor. We have apologies from Councillor Stoddart, Councillor Bell, Councillor Williams, Councillor Kendall, and Councillor Kirkbride. Councillor Kendall, however, is trying to get onto the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Declaration of interest, anybody? There are none.
No, it doesn't appear any, Chair.
No. Want to questions from the members of the public? Are there any?
No questions, Chair.
Gail, it's Peter Kendall. I can't get into this.
He's having a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Review of fees and charges, and that's page 15 to 18.
Also the appendices, Chair, as well, which were sent out separately.
Yeah, mine eventually came. So, Julian, are you taking us through the review of fees and charges?
Gillian, you may be on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. This is a report concerning the review of the fees and charges falling under this licensing service. So it affects Hackney carriages and private hires, applications made under the Licensing Act 2003, applications made under the Gambling Act 2005, sex establishments, scrap metal and hypnotism. And before I go any further, as it's quite a substantial agenda with appendices, I think it might be helpful just to go through the content and the layout. So the agenda is made up of 3 reports plus appendices. There's the main licensing committee report at pages 15 to 18. That has 2 appendices which followed on to councillors. Appendix 1 refers to the draft council report dated the 3rd of March, and the second appendix is the draft executive report dated the 24th of February. Each of these 2 reports have their own appendices, and Appendix 1 to the council report lists the proposed fees, which I'll come back to. So the reason for the report is for members of the licensing committee to note and approve the recommendations made in both the council report and the executive report. The background to this report is that it has been a long established principle supported by case law that fees charged must be based on cost recovery only. The costs the council may legally recover in fees consists of administration costs, costs associated with investigating the suitability of applicants for licenses, and costs of monitoring compliance of those with licenses. For the council to demonstrate that the fees are reasonable and proportionate, a considerate amount of work has been carried out, resulting in these reports. Just turning to the licensing committee report. Okay. Although the principle applies across the licensing service as a whole, members should note that the setting of licensing fees is subject to legislation. In the council report, the fees are split into parts A, B and C. Part A are statutory fees. Part B are fees set by the council but which have a maximum cap set on them by legislation. And Part C are discretionary fees set by council based on cost recovery. A comprehensive review of the fees and charges has taken place and 2 reports prepared for consideration by executive and council. In most cases, council would set the fees and charges, but the responsibility for fee setting and delegations for scrap metal is an executive function, which is why there are 2 separate reports. In addition to the review of fees and charges, the delegations for the roles involved in the scrap metal hearings require updating, together with the introduction of additional licence provisions under the Hackney Carriage and Private Hire regime, namely, as required by legislation, an option to grant certain licences for a longer duration where appropriate, together with the new fee. The licensing committee is asked to examine the reports and amend or recommend approval to the proposals. If we now turn to the council report, Lee, if you wouldn't mind putting the recommendations up.
Yeah, just give me a moment, please, Gillian, and I'll get it sorted.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go on to here, Gillian, Chair, Councillor Lynch has a hand raised.
Is it okay to just ask a question, Chair?
Yes.
Gillian, is it best to ask questions as you're going through rather than come back to them?
Probably, yeah, because it's quite a long report. So
Yeah, we'll do it page by page. Is that all right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
There's someone else with a raised hand.
Yeah, it's Councillor Kendall, Chair.
Okay, Kendall, Councillor Kendall.
Can you hear me? I tried for well over half an hour to get in.
Yeah, can hear you, Peter.
Yeah, but I'm quite happy because it's such a lengthy report. I would rather we went through it page by page, please.
Okay. I think we're agreed with that. Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendations in the council report start at paragraph 2 as displayed. So these are the recommendations that the licensing committee is asked to note and approve. So the first one is that the statutory fees are noted, that the council is required to charge in respect of the specified licences under the Licensing Act 2003 and the Gambling Act 2005, and those are set out in Part A of Appendix 1. And it's recommended that the authority implements these fees, or if they're subject to statutory amendment, the relevant amended fees on the 1st of April 2021. The second recommendation is that the authority implements with any necessary modification and also with effect from the 1st of April 2021, the proposed fees set out in Part B of Appendix 1 that relate to those licenses and the licensing related activities where the authority has the discretion to determine the fees. The third recommendation is that the council recommends that the authority implements with any necessary modification and with effect from the 1st of April 2021, the proposed fees as set out in Part C of Appendix 1 that relate to those licenses and licensing related activities where the authority has the discretion to determine the fees with the exception of those fees in the following 2 paragraphs. And the reason for that is that those fees are subject to advertisement. The first ones relate to the council proposing to vary the fees relevant to drivers, hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and operator licences as set out in Part C of Appendix 1 with any necessary modification, and also to instruct the licensing department in accordance with the specified legislation there to publish in a local newspaper a notice setting out those fees that is proposed to be varied and specifying a period from the 12th of April 2021. The reason for this is that once the amended charges are approved, we must advertise the amendments for not less than 28 days. And if there are no objections to those proposed variation in fees received by the 12th of April, or all objections so made are withdrawn by that date, the council agrees to implement the proposed variation to those fees on the 12th of April 2021. If objections are received to the proposed variation, it will be referred back to council at the next meeting, which is the 19th of May 2021, with a view to setting that date as being the date the proposed variation comes into effect with or without modification. At 2.5, we have the next recommendation, which is that the council introduces hackney carriage and private hire driver licences for the duration of 3 years in accordance with the Deregulation Act from the 12th of April 2021, if there are no objections to the new fees, or if there are at the later council meeting on the 19th of May 2021. And the next recommendation is that the council introduces private hire operator licences for the duration of 5 years from the 12th of April 2021 in accordance with the relevant legislation, should there be no objections. But again, if there are objections to the proposed fees, to come into effect on the 19th of May 2021 at the next council meeting. You can find the fees at Appendix 1. Lee, could you go on to those proposed fees, please?
Yes, Julian. Just prior to that, we have a couple of members that wanting to ask questions. Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Over to you, Chair. We have Councillor Kendall, then Councillor Lynch.
Or Councillor Kendall, then, please.
Just
Councillor Kendall. Yeah.
It's basically, I take on board what has just been said. The main report, what 3 to 6, there are certain items that I just want a little bit of clarification on. On page 5 under 3.4 of the main sort of review of charges, under 3.4, it says the Court of Justice of the European Union has subsequently determined that all successful applications, blah, 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 blah. Seeing that we've now left the EU, do we just take that as a transfer of the principle set out in that, and we accept that as our standing order on this? Okay, and then I've got a few others as we go through the main body of the report. Thank you, but if you could answer us that, Gillian, I'd be grateful.
Yes, we would continue with that principle.
Yeah, could I just go on under 7? I know I'm coming into, we've never had to deal with hypnotism. Do you think there's any other issues that we could actually deal with, sort of like, I'm just thinking where you would put in, say, if you had something like Magician Acts or something like that, what would that come under? Okay. And basically then coming on to page 8, 3.231, 2 and 3 under 8, that's the grant, hackney carriage licenses and so on. What feedback up to this week have you had from the trade on where they would like it to be? Because we know in the past the trade have sometimes said they just want to leave things as they are. Okay. And
Peter, how many have you got, Peter?
yeah, and then the final thing is this issue around scrap metal collection. It's a bit of an issue. I mean, I worked all my life as a plumber doing jobs from jobs. Now, when this came in, what you actually did was, as a plumber, you would do your job, you would take the scrap metal out when you were replacing whatever, and then once a year, twice a year, you would actually weigh your scrap in. Unless you've actually got a sort of carrier's license for scrap, a one-man scrap plumber can't do that anymore. And also, I was actually stopped. This is the craziness of it. I go to the plumber's merchant and I buy a length of copper pipe. I buy 10-foot of pipe. I then go and do a job and I use less than half a metre of that. I'm not allowed in law, the principle of law, to put the remainder of that copper tube, which is brand new, in the back of the van, because that at that point becomes scrap. And it's the same with a builder. If he buys a bag of cement and he takes a shovel full of cement out of his bag, it is not allowed in the principle of law with the scrap or whatever to actually put the remainder of the bag of cement in the back of the car. Once you've opened it, once you've cut whatever, it then becomes scrap or waste. And quite honestly, the cost of your carrier's license to carry scrap, then it becomes prohibitive. And what it actually exacerbates is people turning around and saying, well, I'll just dump this, you know, and it exacerbates the issue of fly tipping. And I think
Councillor, what's your question?
Well, is there any relief for one-man builders, plumbers that can actually take once a year, take their scrap in without having a carrier license, and B, once they bought a length of copper tube, if they take a foot off it, are they allowed to sort of take it back? Because the letter of the law says once you've actually taken a foot off the length of copper pipe, the whole thing becomes scrap, and it's a brand new. The remainder of the pipe is brand new. What's the stance on licensing? So are they prepared to give waylay on that? Okay.
Thank you, Gillian.
And that's it, Gillian. Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right. So if I go back to your first question, which was relating to, and the example you gave was a Magician's Act. All we can do at the moment is set fees for the services that the licensing functions that come under our service. At the moment, licensing functions are split between different departments, and we can only do those that concern us. If something new did come out, like the latest thing was scrap metal actually, then we would have to introduce our own regulations and calculate our own fees for that. But we can't do anything until new legislation comes out for new functions. So I hope that answers that question. The feedback from the trade on the taxi fees, we will get that feedback once we advertise it. That's the purpose of advertising those new fees. It is required by legislation that we advertise them for no less than 28 days. They and the rest of the public will then have an opportunity to comment on those fees. And if there are objections, that's when it goes back to the council meeting at the next meeting on the 19th of May. I think perhaps what you may be referring to in the past is these are fees for actual licenses. The other consultations that we've done with the trade relate to the actual table of fares, which is the fares that they can charge, because we set the maximum for those Hackney fares. And I know in the past, quite often the trade have come back and said that they haven't wanted those to change.
Mm-hmm.
But these are licence fees. Moving on to the third question about scrap. Part of our assessment criteria on the application is to check what other licences they've got, because we would only issue the collector or the site licence. We have no control over any other licences, which, like I think the carrier's licence is issued by the Environment Agency. So we can only follow legislation, I'm afraid, and what that stipulates. We can't give any relief as to any other regulations they've got to follow or any other licences that are required. We can only follow our own. So I hope that answers all three questions.
Yeah, I maybe want to come back to you, Gillian, as a one-to-one to give you other examples, because it is a minefield for one-man builders or plumbers. This is.
Can we leave it at that, Councillor, please? Okay. We've got Councillor Leach is waiting to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Relating to 2.5 and 2.6 on page 4, just want to ask the Hackney 2.5, the Hackney carriage licence. At the moment, is it 1 year and it's going to 3 years?
It is 1 year at the moment. We do have to offer the option of 3 years. But we can still grant a 1 year licence if we think that's appropriate.
Yeah, you can still have a 1 year, but do you feel most people will go on to a 3 year?
Probably, I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, because it's not a great deal more on a 3 year than it is on a 1 year.
No.
Yeah. Now, is that the same also with 2.6 on the operator's licence? That has now gone from 3 to 5. Will that still be an option where you can have a 3 or a 5?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Lee, have we got another hand?
Yeah, Chair, we have Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Daniels.
Councillor Wilkinson then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Gillian, being an ex-taxi driver myself quite a number of years ago, back then the licenses were for a more prolonged period. I'm looking at, I've lost it now, 6284.1. The specific licence phase is set out in the relevant appendices and summary of the proposed percentage variations. New Hackney drivers badge 1 year increased by 121.43%. I don't think anybody's going to go for a 12-month if it's increasing by that, when a prolonged license is going to be not much more than the 1 year fee. How were the elongated licenses prices calculated with regards to the price for a 1 year's, please?
The template that we follow to calculate all of the prices followed the same kind of process. The main costs in obtaining a license is at the very beginning. So, for example, for a 1 year license, we would carry out all the checks to make sure that that person is suitable. And then for the following year and the year after, the checks would be more limited. So, for example, you would have, initially, you would need to undergo the DBS check, a doctor's medical, you'd need to do the knowledge test, a driving assessment, and those would all last for a fixed period of time. They wouldn't be repeated in years 2 and 3. So the cost of assessing that applicant would initially be carried out in year 1. The checks would be ongoing, but they do last a fixed period of time, so they wouldn't be carried out as frequently.
Yeah, just to follow up, Chair. The feedback that I'm receiving from the taxi drivers is that they much prefer a more prolonged period and go back to what the old regime used to be. So I think it'd be well received by the taxi drivers. It's just the percentage increases here that look rather alarming.
Okay. I think we got Councillor Daniels waiting.
Gillian, seeing as Councillor Kendall brought up magicians, is there any, have you ever considered licensing buskers, which maybe not so much out there, but are quite prevalent around Keswick? Has that ever come under consideration?
Plenty of comedians.
Buskers are more difficult because they seem to fall outside the current licensing legislation. I do know that some towns like Keswick have in the past brought in their own voluntary kind of permissions, if you like. But at the moment, there's nothing that we can do under the Licensing Act to license them.
Okay, just because I know we get quite a lot of complaints about them here in Keswick. So I just wondered. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, Gillian.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on unless anybody else has got their hand up? We move on, Gillian.
Okay, so the next part I was going to go through was the actual fees. So Lee, if you could bring up the Appendix 1 for me, please. So here what we can see are Type A or the Part A fees, and they are the statutory fees. We've got no power to amend those. So they concern some parts of the Gambling Act applications, all of the Licensing Act applications, and they're all listed there. Part B, on the next part of the appendix, is the discretionary fees that the council can charge, but legislation does set a maximum cap on those. So yeah, just a little bit further up, Lee, please. Page 27. That's it. So again, those relate to some of the Gambling Act fees, including those premises licenses and permits. Now, if I just explain, you can see there that the fees are split into parts A, B, and then the total fee, which we've rounded. So part A is the costs associated with assessing the suitability of the applicant and the application process. Part B is compliance costs. And what we would do is we would just add those together. what the regulations say is that once a person's got a licence, they should be charged both fees. What we will do is we will collect that fee as a total in the beginning, and then if for some reason an applicant is refused a licence, part B of that fee would be refunded back to them, so they wouldn't pay a compliance fee. And then still on Appendix 1 on page 31, those are the Part C fees, and those are the ones that the council can set to recover its reasonable costs, and there's no maximum cap on that set by legislation. So that's the hypnotism, the scrap metal dealers site and collection, the sex establishment licenses, and all the licenses under the taxi regime. So that's drivers, vehicles and operators. Again, as you can see, they're all split into parts A, B, and then rounded in the final column.
Councillor Lynch, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. These are broken down into various things, most of which I can sort of pick out what it is, but on quite a number of them, page 27 and 28 on the betting, it says it's got things like provisional statement. Can you sort of explain what, because there's sort of things down here. Are these separate fees? Like it goes new, annual fee, variation, transfer, reinstatement, provisional statement. Can you sort of explain what each of those ones are, please? Because
yes, so yes.
Are they one off, or do they all add together and make it even bigger?
No, they're all separate fees. So you'd set off, so say for example, we'll just use because they're all the same, so we'll just use the first application type, which is bingo. So for a bingo licence, the new application would be £577. For each bingo premises licence, you pay an annual maintenance fee. If they want to vary the licence, then there's that separate fee. If they wish to transfer it to somebody else, then there's the transfer fee. Reinstatement is if the licence lapses for any reason, and there'll be certain circumstances in the legislation for which a licence would lapse. A provisional statement is where a building may not actually be built yet, so an application is submitted based on proposed plans, or it may be that there is a building but they want to carry out significant alterations, and really before they go ahead with anything and invest any money, they want to be sure that they'll be able to obtain a licence based on their plans. So that's what a provisional statement is. If we grant that provisional statement, if we grant that provisional statement, they still then afterwards need to make a new application following that provisional statement, and that would just be, everything would be reconsidered, but obviously not in as a greater depth wouldn't be required because it's already been done at provisional stage.
But they'd still have to pay the provisional cost and then the cost for a new licence.
No, provisional and then new.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Daniels.
Thank you.
My hand up, sorry.
Councillor Kendall.
Thank you. Gillian, just going back to bingo, it's a bit of a, it comes up, I don't know whether it's come in the past. Churches, one of them big fundraisers of a social evening is probably having weekly parish bingos for small amounts. There's probably, at most, the biggest prize will be probably 20 quid. Are you actually saying from now on, a parish church bingo that runs these weekly, unless they actually pay the annual fees as stated down here, they're not in law, they're not going to be able to run them anymore? Or is there any leeway? You know, because bingos with a lot of churches is the main bread and butter to actually get enough money in the course of the year to pay the gas and the electric bill on the building. Okay.
Yes, there are various exemptions to all kinds of gambling matters there. So what we would do is we would look at the circumstances of each one and just ensure that there isn't an exemption prior to us, you know, asking that person to make an application. There's all kinds of exemptions based on, like you say, the lower end of prizes and things like that. So I can't say right at this minute if they would have an exemption. I would need to check on that for you, but I can come back to you afterwards.
Yeah.
With that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Julian.
Okay.
Just coming in.
And yes. So
just coming in, Chair. So sorry.
All right, Councillor, go on.
Yeah. So Gillian, what you're saying is the likes of Working Men's Club, who play bingo every Sunday night for coppers, there is no exemption for them.
there may be an exception. I would have to check for you, because there's lots and lots of exemptions to all kinds of licensing activities. So I would need to check that for you.
And another question, we have down here new fees, part A, part B, rounded fees, but there's no comparison to the old fees.
Right, okay. I mean, to be honest, we didn't think of putting the old fees in, because I think further in the report there, it explains that it explains when the fees were last reviewed, and some of them were a substantial time ago.
Quite a few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, so it was felt that.
I think it would have just been handy for us to see, because sitting here working out percentages while we're trying to read reports is rather difficult. And I think it might have been just a little bit easier for us to understand if we could see the old fees against the new fees.
Julian.
Yep, okay. So if I just go on to quickly, the second appendix, just to explain that, is just to be noted really, and that just explains the option, the way people can pay. And I'm on page 35 now, Lee, and that when annual fees are payable for each licensing function. And also there is a sample form there if somebody wants to request a refund. I didn't really intend to go any further into the council report, and I was going to go next onto the executive one and go through the scrap metal.
Okay.
Okay, so on page 43, the scrap metal report, there aren't as many recommendations for that one. But basically, that's just to set the fees in accordance with paragraph 6.2.10 and approve the change in delegations in accordance with 6.3.16 A to E. So the fees at 6.2.10, they're just in a table there. As I explained earlier, the reason that there is a separate report for executive is that due to the way the legislation's written, this is an executive function rather than a council function. So these fees won't go to council to be approved. So the proposed fees are there in front of you for site and collector. And again, they're split into part A's and B's and then rounded at the end. There wasn't an awful lot of change in those fees. And they were last set when the legislation first came into force, which was 2013.
Councillor Lynch.
Again, just for clarification, I can understand site renewal. What does site variation mean? Is that if they've increased their capacity or something like that, or taking new materials in or something?
It's for, they can actually change over from a site to a collector and vice versa.
Right.
Or changes in, quite often they're held by companies, so it may be a change of company or somebody who's part of that company, and that needs to be reassessed, because part of the process for assessing whether somebody gets a site license or a collector's license is we do a police check. We check bank accounts to make sure that they do have bank accounts, because cash isn't allowed. And we do enforcement checks with the Environment Agency to see if they've been convicted of certain offences. And if they have, then there would be what we refer to here as a scrap metal hearing. And I'll go on to that when I explain the delegations. Because the application wouldn't come to a licensing panel, it would go to a separate hearing, which is set up for that purpose.
Thank you.
Okay,
Councillor-
so if...
Councillor Kendall, is this relevant to what we're talking about now?
Yes, it is.
Carry on then.
Yeah, it says, Gillian, just getting back to sort of what I raised on this scrap issue. For a small business, it's a real issue. Somewhere along the line, now I'm retired, I'm going to have to empty my garage. And what I would have normally done is all the old copper fittings and pipe work. When I'm saying old ones, a lot of them are brand new still. And probably what I would have done is I would have boxed it all up and I would have taken it to the scrap merchants and just weighed it in. That would have been the no. What you're saying is that I will no longer be able to do that because I haven't got a license to carry scrap. Is that right? Because this is going to be a real dilemma for one-off small businesses. Like I say, I gave you the example. You know, I've been told in law, I go to the plumber's merchants, I pick a piece of copper pipe, a length of copper pipe, it's brand new. I take a foot or a 2 foot off to do a job. I can't be that immediately, the remainder, which is still brand new, then becomes scrap. I can't keep it for another job. I think really, you know, it's a bad thought out policy for people that are genuine and little small businesses that are genuinely operating and, you know, okay.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is we can only follow the legislation and the regulations that go with them. We've got no
comeback,
no discretion.
Okay.
Okay, so if I go on to the other recommendation.
Before you move on, Gillian, just touching on what Councillor Kendall has said. Are you saying now that a man off the street who turns up at the scrapyard with his old washer, who tries to get something back for it rather than fly tip or have to take it to a public amenity, that he is not allowed to walk into the scrapyard and sell his own washer? Or does the legislation only apply to people who's actually running as scrap collectors? Because as Peter's saying, one man just going and getting rid of some stuff on a one-off basis, does the legislation actually put a noose around them?
Julian?
As far, yeah, I'll check that for you because I don't know if without checking the legislation properly. But there are lots of regulations in place for people holding site licenses to make sure that anyone that they're paying is paid into a bank account, and they do check that the people who are bringing metal to them is a licensed collector. Now, I will need to double check and make sure where an individual stands on that.
So we'll get back to Councillor Winkleton.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking the question is that I have, on just one-off basis, I have removed old tin sheetings, etc., from my allotment, which is right beside the scrapyard, and I've just run into the scrapyard with it. Quite a lot of people do, and I want clarity that I'm not breaking the law.
So we'll get back to you then.
If you could, please, yes. Thank you.
Okay, Julian?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if we go on to the delegations, which is on page 49, Lee, please. So delegations A to E. When we first set up this service, we put certain delegations in place, but those, of course, have changed with people's job roles and things. So the new delegations being asked for are under 6.316A, to delegate the power to determine, including the imposition of conditions, all types of applications regarding site licenses and collectors' licenses where no objection is made to either of the following: the head of governance, the legal and licensing manager, the senior licensing and compliance officer, and/or the licensing and compliance officer. That's the first recommendation. So that's just basically if an application is received and no conditions, no objections are received, just to delegate to those listed officers.
Councillor Granger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's at this time where I've got to go to another appointment. So I'd just like to thank Jill and Gillian for the hard work they've put in, and well done, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The second delegation to include the imposition of conditions is for all types of applications regarding site licenses and collectors where an objection is made. And that's when we would hold a scrap metal hearing. And that would consist of the portfolio holder for legal and finance, the head of governance, and/or the legal and licensing manager acting together. The third recommendation is the delegation to refuse site licenses and collectors' licenses to that same scrap metal hearing, and that's the portfolio holder for legal and finance, head of governance, and/or legal and licensing manager acting together. Fourthly, to delegate powers to revoke site licenses and collectors' licenses, and that's to either of the following, excuse me, head of governance, legal and licensing manager, senior licensing and compliance officer, and/or licensing and compliance officer. And finally, to delegate the power to institute, defend, or participate in any action or legal proceedings in respect of any matter relating to the 2013 Act. Sorry. In any case where the head of governance considers that such action is necessary to protect or progress the council's interest, and that's to delegate to the head of governance and/or the legal and licensing manager. And that covers all the recommendations that you've been asked to note and approve in the licensing committee report. And that concludes the presentation of the report, Chair, unless there are any further questions.
Are there any further questions? There are none.
Chair, Councillor Kendall.
All right.
Thank you very much. If there's no questions to be asked, I would like to move the report.
Agreed.
I will
Seconded.
second that.
Seconded. Councillor Lynch. All in favour? Any against?
Just hold on a moment, Chair. I just need to clarify this. Gillian, do you need a vote, or is it just to be noted?
The recommendation
Yeah, I'm looking for
is
it.
to note and support the recommendations. So I'm not quite sure whether a vote's required or not, to be honest.
Well, if we just agree, if the committee just agree, but you see, it's the terminology we're using here.
Yeah.
Yes, councillor.
The way I look at it is to support a report is to have a vote on it.
The only reason I'm asking about this, Gillian, is because it's not a decision. It's just to support. I mean, we can do a vote and make it and formalise it if you like.
I don't think it harms it to do it, to be honest with you. We had this discussion yesterday, actually, but I think given that element of support, it might be better to do the vote and take it to on that.
I would agree.
Okay. Chair,
Yes,
would you like, Chair, sorry to interrupt, Councillor Kendall. To formalise it, I can do the vote, and I'll just need 4 against or abstain. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Right, okay. So, Councillor Bainbridge,
For.
Councillor Daniels,
Or
Councillor Gaston,
For.
Councillor Horsley,
For.
Councillor Kendall,
For.
Councillor Lynch,
For.
Councillor Mumby,
For.
Councillor Smith,
For.
Councillor Tyson,
For.
Councillor Wilkinson.
On the grounds that I'm still needing questions answered with regards to things, I wish to abstain.
Okay.
No. That's noted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chair, you've got 9 in favour, 1 abstention.
Thank you for that.
Can I just ask, Chair,
Yeah.
the vote that we've just done and the recommendation there, that one was to go to executive. We haven't yet, or was that for both of them? Because one's to go to council, one's to go to executive. So have we looked at the recommendations for full council, or was that vote for both of them? I just want some clarification there, please.
Okay. Lee?
My understanding, Chair, that was just to approve all the recommendations, as Gillian stated. Gillian, would you like to come in and confirm? Or Jill?
My understanding would be that the recommendation covers both reports and therefore would be to note and support both to go to council and executive.
Right. So to
Thank
support
you.
both. Okay. Councillor Lynch, is that fine? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, you have Councillor Kendall wishing to speak.
Yeah, all that I was going to say is I was actually moving for both, just to clarify it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where are we now, Lee, on this?
I believe that's all of the business, Chair. So we can come to a close.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. And thanks for the officers. It's quite a complicated affair, that. And we appreciate it.